Hello everybody, welcome back to Forza Horizon 4. Series 26 has given us a lot of SUVs in the form of the Jaguar I-Pace, the all-electric SUV, top of B-Class, this one almost an A-Class, the latest in the Jag range. I think it's, 2018? It's actually a pretty decent-looking vehicle. Like most Jags, it's a pretty good-looking vehicle. But that's not the only SUV that they've given us. Most recently, they've given us the Range Rover Velour, first edition. This is much lower in B-Class. I think it's mid-B class. But they're both sport SUVs, which makes them sport utility vehicles anyway. They're both in this very broad, very popular, very high profit margin genre of vehicles, and there's lots of competition, okay? There is a lot of competition in the range. We got the likes of the Jeep Trackhawk, a Hellcat-powered all-wheel drive Cherokee, basically. We also have the equally impressive Lamborghini Urus. Urus? I think it's Urus. Which is a Porsche Panamera bolted on to a Audi Q7 with a Lamborghini body thrown on it. 641 horsepower, twin-turbo V8. And this one, very, very quick. I think it's the fastest production SUV in the world right now, which is no small feat. That being said, an SUV is universally known to anyone with a brain that it is the practicality of an estate car, or in case of the X6M, the impracticality of a coupe, mixed with the impracticality of an off-roader. So, it's heavier than a sports car or estate car, which means it's slower, and it's higher riding, which means it's slower around corners, in principle. In order to test this theory, I have brought along an Audi RS6 Avant, a fantastic 550 horsepower all-wheel drive estate car. This thing, I love it. It's a fantastic, fantastic machine. It's not the only wild card, though. You see, these SUVs are supposed to be go everywhere, awesome machinery that can do anything. They can go on the track, they can go off-road, they can do anything you want. What if we focused heavily on the off-road section? Not only do we have this Ram T-Rex, another 700 horsepower Hellcat-powered monster, we also have the Warthog. Yes. Because it's actually within the PI range, mid-A class. It's all-wheel drive. It weighs about the same as these SUVs, not a little bit more. So why not, really? So I made a series of tests to figure out which SUV is best. And we start out here on tarmac for a time trial. Best out of the 5 flying laps I gave them would be their time, and some vehicles were certainly better than others. The X6M here is about mid-pack. It's pretty good accelerating, it has over 500 horsepower after all. It's not going to be slouchy with all-wheel drive, don't even for good measure. Has some sporty-ish tires, and it's much more sporty than all the SUVs we'll see here, at least in terms of body style. It's very coupe-ish. It's okay. The handling is not too bad. It's a bit heavy at over 5,000 pounds, which is a lot heavier than some of the other vehicles that we will see later on. But for being so heavy, it is actually pretty good through the corners. It's nothing exceptional. Again, just because of the sheer weight of the thing. It's like driving around an apartment building. But it is not bad. And then when you get to a straightaway, it is pretty rapid. Again, it's not going to be the most rapid vehicle here. It's got just over 500 horsepower. It's not going to blitz any speed records. Here we got 700 horsepower, 600 horsepower monsters. But it is pretty quick for being a mid-tier one. I think it starts out relatively low A class, this one, so it was not bad. The same cannot be said for the I-Pace. The I-Pace here was fantastic through the corners. probably one of the best handling vehicles here, to be perfectly honest. And that makes sense. The batteries are located in the floors, got electric motors on all four corners. One interesting thing though, electric cars are universally known for their fantastic acceleration. Look at the Rimac Concept 2. Phenomenal accelerating machinery here. But they couldn't handle it very well. Trying to drive the Rimac is a bit scary. The I-Pace, however, is the exact opposite. It has no acceleration, no top speed, but it is phenomenal around the corners. It's very odd vehicle. I like how it drives. You can really chuck it into the corners, carry good corner speed. I mean, on that first turn one, it's carrying over 80 miles an hour through that corner. That is very fast for a 4,000-pound SUV. I was very impressed with the I-Pace. That really surprised me on the handling department. If it just had about another 150, 200 horsepower, it would be unstoppable. But it stuck with about 380, so it just does not have the power-to-weight ratio to match these other vehicles, which does knock it down a bit on the lap time. Not as much so as its Series 26 brother, the Range Rover Velour. How can I say this? It was terrible. The cornering was good. It was pretty darn good, actually, around the corners. Not bad. It could carry 80 miles an hour again through turn 1. That's very impressive. But it somehow managed to have even less acceleration than the I-Pace. And again, it's not really that surprising because, well, it's the least powerful vehicle here by some margin. I think it has, what, 335 horsepower, weighs over 4,500 pounds. It's atrocious power-weight ratio, and it's 150 PI down on the top-tier cars. So, for what it is, for being as close to other vehicles as it is, it's not bad, I guess, for the PI, but in this field, it's terrible. It just does not have the handling. It does not, well, it has the handling, does not have the acceleration. It needs about 200 more horsepower to be any good in this, unfortunately. Which brings us on to the obvious winner of this, the Lamborghini Urus. Dominated here. Absolutely stupid lap time. I cannot believe how fast that thing went around the track. And again, it's easy to see why. It's a Lamborghini tuned by Porsche and Audi, so, you know, pretty darn quick. 640 horsepower, all-wheel drive, sport tires, sport suspension. It's a proper handling vehicle, but unlike the I-Pace and unlike the Velour, it actually has a lot of go about it as well. It is almost an S-Class car after all. It is at the very, very, very top of A-Class. So, it absolutely flies. The only vehicle that stood a chance of catching it was the RS6 Avant, which did come in second place on our table, but it was a second slower. That was a result I did not expect. I expected the Urus to win, I'll be real. I expected it to win. I did not expect it to be a second faster than an Audi RS6. The RS6 is a darn good vehicle, and it got humiliated by a SUV. Arguably, though, more impressive, the Trackhawk. I did not think the Trackhawk anything other than a straight-line speed vehicle with lots of power and no turning, but it came third. It was only 0.2 of a second down, exactly 0.2 of a second down, on the Avant. That is ridiculously good. I was very, very surprised by that. One vehicle that I was not surprised by was the Macan. I was hoping that would be a lot better than what it actually was. It did get a sub 1 minute lap at 8th place, 59.6, but I was expecting better. I mean, sure, it beats Ram, the Rebel T-Rex, which managed to squeak its way into the top 10. And sure, it beats, you know, the Warthog and other stuff like that, but it just wasn't quick. I was expecting it to be a lot better, considering it's, you know, a Porsche. But the Porsche got beaten by a Bentley Bentayga. The definition of what if you take a Palace road racing. So, the Porsche really surprised me. which means it is time to move on to our second test. This is actually going to be another time trial. It's very rare I do 2 time trials in this. However, I wanted to spice things up by going off-road, and while I'm sure this is not a very aggressive off-road trail, the Ambleside Country Circuit, it does have one big jump, one big hill, but other than that, it's not too bad. I picked it because it's all dirt. There's no tarmac, there's no mixed surface, it's all just gravel and dirt. And that's why I wanted to test, because these are sport utility vehicles, so they should be pretty good off-road. And thought I would have a go with it. I'll be honest, the RS6 was just gonna struggle here. It's a sports vehicle, it's got sporty suspension, sporty tires, or I should say much more focused sporty suspension and sporty tires than these other vehicles. It's an estate car. It's gonna struggle. That's just a fact. And while it did do better than I was anticipating, it just didn't have the overall pace, it didn't have the traction, it didn't have the, I guess, off-road capability, which is to be expected from the estate car. One vehicle that really surprised me, at least in the handling, it didn't do the best in terms of overall lap time, but one thing that really surprised me on the handling department was the Maserati Levante. I've never thought much of the Levante, other than the fact it's that GTA car with that Lampadati made. But it's really good handling, even on the dirt. I did not expect the Levante to be very good on the dirt. And while sure it doesn't have the overall pace, I felt very comfortable pushing it hard on the dirt. I was very, very surprised by that. It's a very, very good vehicle, if I can be perfectly honest. And that honestly surprised me. Once again, in a complete lack of surprise, the Range Rover Velour continued to disappoint. This time, a bit better. It is within a second of other vehicles, but it's still not great. Again, I use the handling. This is a much more handling-focused track, the Ambleside 3. There's only one straightaway. And I thought it would do a little better here, considering it was decent in handling. No. No. It was not great. The handling wasn't too bad, it just didn't have the, again, the overall pace. It kept getting understeered through the corners. And then the lack of power on the one acceleration zone really, really hurt it. So, not great for that. Now it's time to bring up the elephant in the room. When I included the T-Rex and the Warthog, I did it as sort of a, oh hey, they're within the same PI limit, they're both relatively same specifications, it would be a good laugh. One thing I did not account for is off-road tires. You see, the cars come with tires that are better than rally tires. And considering every other vehicle is a sports SUV, so they have sportier tires, more low-profile tires, they're not going to be as good as these off-roaders will off-road, and I thought they would be quite good. They were very, very, very good. The fastest of the normal SUVs, I guess, was about a 43.6. This Warthog, 41.3. It's so fast, and to be honest, it was expected. The tires are off-road racing tires, basically the off-road equivalent of racing slicks in this game. It's all-wheel drive, 750 horsepower. Sure, it weighs a ton, and it has a top speed of 120, but you're never going to reach that top speed here. So it's it's almost like a WRC car in this field. I probably should have recognized that as I was going into it, but, yeah, you know, I just didn't. I didn't realize just how brutally fast that vehicle was. But, yeah, that was absurdly fast. Very, very impressive on the Warthog. I mean, if you look at the table here, if you include the AMG G65, which did make up for its debacle of a lap time on the tarmac, it's still 2 seconds faster than a, well, off-road SUV, a proper off-road SUV. Yeah, that was incredibly fast. Also incredibly fast, the Trackhawk and the Urus, again, being the best of the rest in this case, 4th and 5th respectively. Very, very fast lap times. 43.64 for the Euro, 43.67 for the track hog. Very, very close. Very, very fast for what are, low-slung, sporty SUVs that can lap a track as fast as an Audi. I mean, they're a second faster than the Audi on here. So, in terms of managing mixed surfaces, those vehicles are fantastic. Another surprised me, the Range Rover Sport. Very consistent, scored 6th place on the tarmac and 7th place here. Very respectable for that vehicle. You often forget about it, but it was pretty good. Same thing with the Cayenne Turbo, also being very consistent in 6th place. Yeah, the SUVs, on the most part, were putting up a pretty good fight, even on the off-road sections, which meant it was time to go a little bit more extreme in the scenario with a river run. We would start out here and just drive straight through the river until we reach the exit at the lake, if you will. This is completely ludicrous, completely mental. This would never happen, but it's in Forza, and we have all these vehicles in Forza, so why the heck not? I think it's a brilliant, brilliant thing. And, well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know which vehicles are going to be good and which vehicles are going to be bad. The bad category would definitely fall into the RS6, considering it's a car, it's a normal car, which means the ground clearance makes the water nearly go up to the hood, which means there's a lot of resistance. So sure, it has all-wheel drive and over 550 horsepower, but the sheer lack of ground clearance, the sheer amount of water you have to push out of the way of that vehicle does slow it down quite a bit. And while it's not completely flat out, I wasn't that crazy and overpowering the other vehicles. I do have a chicane and I do have some tight sections here and there. It is still very flat out for a lot of it, so the RS6 struggled. What can I say? The RS6 really, really struggled. The Bentley also a similar thing. It did do better than I was expecting. That was not bad at all. Got up to some pretty good speed. It does have a 6-liter W12 in it, so lots of power. Surprisingly good ground clearance, because you don't want to, step on all the poor people. So you just drive over them. But it did a lot better than I was expecting. It did better than the BMW. It did better than the F-Pace. It did better than a lot of vehicles. And for a Bentley Bentayga, I was quite pleased with how that vehicle turned out. The biggest surprise, though, for me by far, is the Range Rover Sport, the SVR, because everyone knows Range Rovers are very good off-road. Everyone knows that they're fantastic off-roaders, but this one, you wouldn't expect it to be, because it is a sport vehicle and most people don't think about it very much, but it was really fast. I don't know if it was the ground clearance or a push bar or whatever, because it's not the most powerful vehicle here. It's not the highest ride height, and yet it demolished all of the normal SUVs. It destroyed them in this. It was very, very good. It was only a second and a half slower than a Mercedes G65, which is a purpose-built off-roader pretty much. So, I was seriously impressed with the Range Rover. Now, I know what you're thinking. The Warthog is the obvious winner here. And yes, the Warthog was incredibly fast. It was stupidly fast. It wasn't the winner, though. For the simple reason of, well, as you saw there, it is a bit tall. And trying to fit under the bridges and through the canals is a bit scary with it. I did have a contingency plan of lowering the suspension on these vehicles if they couldn't fit under the bridge, and then putting a time penalty on for all the inches I had to lower it. I didn't have to do that, but I did have to be really careful, and that meant it did cost me some time. So, while it did claim an impressive second, and expected to be honest, second place, the Ram Rebel did beat it considerably, being the only vehicle to get a 54 dead on the run. That was ridiculously fast. It is, which is kind of surprising. It's 50 horsepower down on the Warthog. It's, well, not a Warthog, but it was very good. It was scarily good. So, no surprise there. The proper off-roaders, 1, 2, 3 finish pretty much. Again, the Range Rover SVR and Ford's very impressive, being only a second down on that Mercedes. Very, very impressive. 5th place would go to the Urus, because that makes sense. But it was very good in the water. It was significantly better than its rival, the Jeep Trackhawk, for sure. So, yeah, a Lamborghini is apparently very good at racing through a river. Also very good, the Maserati Levante, 6th place, very impressive, beats out the Cayenne, beats out the Macan by a lot, beats out the X6. That was very impressive. The I-Pace, which I was hoping would be pretty good considering the electric power source, was not good. It was barely faster. It was actually slower than the Macan. The only thing it did not get beaten by was the F-Pace, the RS6, and the Stelvio. The Range Rover Velour actually beat something for once. It didn't come last. It came 14th, but it didn't come last. So good job, little champ, for not sucking completely, making up something, even though you are still 10 positions down on your big brother. But, you know, we'll take what we can get here, okay? And finally, we move on to a 0 to 100 to 0 test. Now, just for a bit of added, utilitarianism, I did make it on the sand, just for a bit of variety here. And, well, no surprises. The Ram was quite quick. 700 horsepower, off-road tires, all-wheel drive on sand will be remarkably fast. The Lamborghini Urus. Yeah. I mean, sure you'll say, oh, well, that was obvious. I mean, they have so much more power. Yeah, but it's not just power needs, it tests braking as well, it tests traction, and I was not expecting the Jeep to do as well as it did. Same thing with the Audi, again, a normal car, just a little bit slower than the Urus with, 100 horsepower less. Very impressive on that. It beats the Warthog by 0.05 of a second. That is remarkably fast. And in fact, the Stelvio, also very, very respectable. Not the best in any contention so far, pretty mediocre. But in the sand, again, his score is very impressive, just like the Tarmac. The Cayenne was a bit of a letdown. It is significantly more powerful than its younger brother, the Macan, but it's only a little bit faster than it. Probably because of the weight, it's a lot heavier than the Macan, but there you go. The I-Pace, though, was the real disappointment. Honestly, the I-Pace is just pathetic, because this is the only electric car in the field. It's all-wheel drive. It's relatively lightweight in comparison. And it is basically second to last. It's not fast at all. It does not have the power, and it's too focused on being an everyday road car to be a powerful electric car. Unlike the Rimac, which is just brutally fast, the I-Pace was not. I think it was just too road-centered. But whichever way you look at it, the winner was the Ram. By a relatively considerable margin, 0.09 of a second to that Trackhawk, and then another 0.09 of a second to the Urus. Very close between those three. Completely different vehicles. Completely different. The Sport SVR continues to be mid-pack, if not slightly impressive, with an 8th place finish, beating out the Cayenne and the Macan. The I-Pace is not great. It does beat out the Durango SRT. It beats out his brother, the F-Pace, and it beats out the poor Velour, which continues to struggle a lot. Which means it is time for the final totals, and, well, this is a bit interesting, because the winner is the Ram. So yeah, the Ram scoring 2 first places, a 2nd place, and a 10th place. It beat the Urus by 4 points, so it was very close, but it beat the Urus. The Urus will come home in second, 254 points, followed up in a pretty distant third with the Warthog. Yeah, my comedy vehicles that I threw in just as a bit of a laugh turned out to lock out 2 of the 3 positions on the podium, including the win in my SUV Showdown. So I guess the next normal SUV would be the Trackhawk in a very distant fourth, some 30 points behind the Urus, beating out the Cayenne Turbo, which consistency, never got on the podium, but was consistent enough to score a 6th place, beating out the Range Rover in 5th place, thanks to that impressive river run. Still amazed by that river run Showdown. The RS6 Avant was the big oddball here, being the only estate car, and it does well to score just under 200 points in 7th place, beating out the Mercedes AMG and the Bentayga and the Alfa Stelvio, being the last car in the top 10. The I-Pace, very disappointing, 127 points, fractionally, I mean like 1 point, beating out the Durango SRT, another vehicle that was consistent enough to score a 15th place. Not great at all, very low tier, but able to be within contention of the I-Pace, very close together, those guys. In fact, the I-Pace, the Durango, and the F-Pace are all separated by just 7 points, so it had a very close finish for 14th place. And then we have the poor Velar. It's to be expected, the Velar. It's, like I said at the beginning, it's 150 PI points down on the Urus, so it's not going to be winning anything. We never really expected it to. The river run was probably the most impressive thing by far about it, being good enough to best the Stelvio. All in all, it just doesn't have the pace. It's a bit too mid-tier. That wasn't the only car that left me longing, though. I was hoping the RS6 would do a little bit better, just for representing the estate cars. It does manage to get a top 10, which is good, especially considering its disastrous river run and its mediocre dirt lap time being made up for with the fantastic tarmac and the very good sand runs. But I was hoping for a little better. I was hoping for a top 5, but surprisingly, SUVs are bloody fast these days, and if you're going to pick a proper SUV, the winner is obviously the Urus. I mean, it's the obvious one. It's the highest PI. It's not the most powerful, but it is the best power-to-weight ratio. I mean, it's made by Germans, dressed up by Italians. It's just a recipe for success. It's a fantastic handling car. Not the best handling car. I still think that goes surprisingly to the I-Pace, but it is not bad in any stretch of the word. But the points table leads us to, at the end, a startling conclusion. If you want the best SUV in Forza Horizon 4, your best bet is a pickup truck. So that will be it for this episode of Forza Horizon 4. I'll be back with more